Hello and welcome back to another episode of Verbose, a podcast by Mary on information overload. Sorry, it kind of took me a minute because this is actually my very first video podcast. Super impromptu. I don't even know that topic was supposed to be the next one, but I have kind of been off and on. I started this journey in 2021, 2.5 years ago. Yeah, 2.5 years ago. And I am just getting to what would be my 10th or probably 11th episode from what I can recall. And so it's definitely not the podcast that's a weekly, monthly, or any type of lease. It's definitely one of those that I do at my leisure because I deserve to have something in my life that's done at my leisure, right? Everything else is so scheduled and so organized. So this is where I come to kind of spill my guts. It's unedited. It's not, again, it's probably not like any other podcast that you listen to. This is completely a different setup. And I turned the camera on for you guys because I wanted to kind of test out how this is going to work out. So I'm obviously doing a lot more than I usually would. So just bear with me while I process my thoughts here. Yeah, so on information overload, this is a topic that has probably been with me the last 2 years or so, actually. I have been wondering how the amount of information that we take in on a daily basis affects our everyday lives, right? And I mean that not in just the way of our opinions and our perspectives, but also our abilities to function. So, for example, imagine that you are someone that's always had this lifelong goal of being an architect. That's literally been your dream for as long as you can remember. And then all of a sudden, after going down the rabbit hole of self-improvement, for example, you find yourself pivoting to doing that instead, right? Because now you feel like, oh, you're enlightened and that's your new dream. And don't get me wrong, as a queen of pivoting, I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with changing your mind. Changing your mind is definitely one of those things that I encourage. I just feel like to what end, right? As long as it's led from a place of knowing versus knowing, like knowing, inner knowing, not outside knowledge. Does that make sense? And all of us, to a certain extent, is influenced by what we see, hear, feel, smell, those kind of things, right? Our senses literally influence a lot of the way that we function. But when is too much, right? Because social media is now faster than it used to be. So it was a slow build of information that is now turned into 30-second clips and numerous for as long as you can doom scroll. And I've been wondering about the effect on me personally, right? I know that I flourished and I thrived the most in my overall life when I was not consuming as much online, when I was more creating. But now we're living in a time where trends are carrying a lot of algorithms. And in order to kind of stay updated on the times, it does require a little consumption, right? But the problem lies in when the consumption just turns into, again, information overload. And so for me, I think I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, I have to find a balance and I have to choose my mental health and my well-being over, and my ability to function over having to stay relevant and having to catch every single thing that, that comes about. So that's kind of the way that I'm framing social media now. I, a lot of times, focus on just creating. And as far as my consumption goes, it's very limited. I can definitely catch myself before I get to the point of doom scrolling because I notice what it's doing to my attention span. I notice what it's done to my ability to carry conversations in a certain way. I also notice what it's done for my executive dysfunction, right? There's always that need to have something going in the background. And I don't think there's anything wrong with background noise. I've pretty much have that for most of my adult life because I've lived alone the entire time. Again, background noise from the TV is completely different from background noise from social media. Because with the TV, I can kind of control it, right? I can turn on Friends or Seinfeld or whatever my comfort show is for that day and just have it going. Literally not think about what is being said. Maybe catch a joke here and there. But when it comes to social media, the amount of stuff that is put on there to get a reaction out of people, it eventually starts to affect you, no matter how brave and bulletproof you think you are, right? And I talked about this on the vlog that's actually going up on Sunday. I recognized that I just needed to cut it off. And this was actually TV I was talking about because I was watching a show on HBO Max. And I think what I'm saying all this to say is that I cannot believe it's taken me this long, but I am grateful that I've gotten to this point of being able to say, yeah, you know what, being online should not be at the detriment of my ability to function. And so I'm like, I don't care what the cost is because it won't be as expensive as the damage that has been done to my mental health the last couple of years where I have been consuming a lot of internet. Does that make sense? I will forever be team internet. I will forever love this little bubble that we create on the World Wide Web. No one will ever be able to tell me that the internet is not a beautiful thing despite its cons. But I know even if I completely vanished off of social media or like off the internet, I still will always be a big advocate because I understand that it's a tool, right? I like the internet the way that I like money. It is not something that I am willing to die for, but it is something that I recognize works as a tool if used, in a healthy manner. A lot of times we don't really know that we're going down the rabbit hole until we're too far gone. And so I think when it comes to your mental health, you just have to make sure that you're catching it before it gets bad, not waiting until everything is a catastrophe. And then you're like, oh my God, my life is coming to an end. So I think with the whole bed rotting situation, that's obviously taken the internet by storm. We're all finding comfort and solace in the fact that there are people like us that are just sitting at home doing nothing. I obviously don't have the luxury of just bed rotting all day long, but I get the point. I get what the idea behind it is. But I think that at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, if we didn't have social media to scroll all day long, what would we be bed rotting doing, right? So if you can answer that question, let's say for you, you would be reading, or maybe you would be writing, or maybe you'd be dancing. Oops, look at that. You're out of bed now, right? So I think that's a good place to start. Once you realize where your attention would be if you were not doom scrolling, it allows you to kind of reconnect with what your, I don't want to say passion, because like that word has also become a lot of something else for me, but you find out what you're supposed to be doing or what you would be doing, if that makes sense. Again, COVID has done a number on us. For those of us that are still not admitting it, we're definitely feeling it. Even though we don't know it yet, the body is keeping score. And a lot of us are just not peopling the way that we were peopling before. The internet, great as it is, has created this faux comfort, right? This faux community to a certain extent. Like we feel like the same way you used to be able to just go home and be excited to talk to your friends or do something with your family. Now it's like, oh, I can't wait to get home so I can scroll TikTok or scroll Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is your social media of choice is. So again, it's now created that community in our mind. And I made a video a long time ago. I think it was on my original channel. And this is when I just used to do vlogs, literally, like just like voice memos. I guess it's kind of like this, but before podcasts were even like a really big booming thing. I would just talk about random subjects that came to mind. And that was one of the things that I talked about social media. Like, is social media making us asocial or antisocial? And, you know, again, it could be argued that that is one of the disadvantages, is that sometimes it creates a community, which is wonderful, but it makes you feel like you no longer need that in-person interaction. And we just have to be careful that we're not tipping the scale, because at the end of the day, human beings do need humans. A lot of people are talking online about being touch deprived, and I think this is why. Beyond the romantic aspect of it, I think not enough of us are getting out of our houses. And because we're not leaving, we're not seeing people. Because we're not seeing people, we're not engaging with them. Because we're not engaging with them, of course, we're not physical. Does that make sense? And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still kind of like getting in this vibe of sitting in front of the camera. But yeah, information overload. Like, you got to know when you've just seen too much of something, because any topic of choice, like anything that you're interested in, can be pushed on you to a point where you're just like tired of it. And I think this is where burnout comes, whether as a creator or as a consumer. I think creator burnout is something we've talked about for years, but a lot of people don't talk about consumer burnout. You can see so much of the same thing to where that, again, you start to feel like there is no good in the world. There's too much happening. And, you know, what's even the point of being here? And all those things are valid statements. But I mean, for crying out loud, I created this podcast as a part of a way of journaling my existential crisis. But we need balance. We're still here, right? You're not going anywhere. So as long as you're here, you might as well not spend the time dwelling on the why, right? I think the how is more important in this particular case. I'm a why girl. I'm someone that thinks why is one of the most important questions to ask in a lot of situations. But in this particular case, I think trying to figure out why things are the way they are will literally stress you to death. And I guess if that's your goal, then maybe go for it. But if not, I think the how matters. And the how meaning, how can we sustain ourselves while we're still stuck here on this moving, I'm drawing a blank, but you know exactly what I mean, this moving circle of life. And yeah, I feel like I had a lot of thoughts until I turn the camera on. And my camera is also overheating. So I'm going to also have to reevaluate doing these on my vlog camera, because my vlog camera has this overheating issue. But if you're listening to me for the first time because you found me via YouTube, definitely subscribe to me anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I'm on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all of the things. So yeah, this is your first episode. This is kind of how they go. There is no structure. I don't plan on having guests on here. It's not that type of party. It's literally just my brain dump, hence the word verbose. A lot of times I can go on tangents, but for whatever reason, I started this podcast and I could not talk for longer than 17 minutes. So maybe this is teaching me how to be concise without even knowing. But what's crazy is I'm not like this in person. Like, you meet me in person, because I don't have a lot of human interaction, I'm going to throw up on you, especially if I feel like you have the capacity to understand me. Okay, and here I go on another tangent. Thank y'all for listening. This was just kind of like a warm up, and I'm also wanting to see if this audio quality is a little bit different than what I usually do. So again, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Verbose, and I will see you on the next one. Ciao.